Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining this week's panel conversation. My name is Matt, Vice President for engagement. We work with communities around helping to build engagement and help assess performance in local government from a resident's perspective. And I'm just really happy that you're taking some time to listen to these sessions. I've got two excellent panelists on the call today. We're focusing in on law enforcement and how resident input impacts on the delivery of police services and keeping communities safe. And our hope is that you'll just pick up some perspectives on what might help you in the work that you're doing, or if you're just interested in what's going on around local government and policing, that this conversation will be beneficial to you. The day goes along, or the session goes along pretty straightforward. I'll do a quick introduction of our panelists, and then we'll get into the questions and exchange viewpoints on those topics that we have. The session generally takes about an hour. I think it'll be a little bit shorter today, but just really appreciate you taking some time to be with us.
Absolutely.
With that, let me go ahead and make some introductions to our panelists. I'm really happy to introduce Dave Zack. Dave is the Chief of Police for the Asheville Police Department in North Carolina. He became chief back in February 2020. He has a big department with a lot of responsibilities. He's got 300 employees, 238 sworn officers, and 63 non-sworn, and an annual operating budget of over $300 million. So huge responsibilities that he's responsible for. He actually began his law enforcement career back in 1984 when he worked for New York State at both Sing Sing and Attica Correctional Facilities. And then in 87, he joined the Chicago Police Department and rose through the ranks in a number of different roles until he became chief in 2011. During his career, he has also served as the president to the Erie County Chiefs of Police Association, the president of the New York State Associations of Chiefs of Police, and was also a member of the Board of Governors for IACP. So he's had a strong commitment to his profession. One of the other things I really appreciated in learning a little bit about Chief Zack's background is his work in introducing the first fair and impartial police training program in New York, the state of New York, and received the National Federation for Just Communities Law Enforcement Leadership Award for that work. He's also been recognized by the National Alliance for Mental Health Illness with their President's Award for his role in creating the first crisis intervention team in Erie County. Chief, I also appreciate the work that you're doing in forensic science and your crime scene photography. You just really have contributed a lot to the profession and to mentoring others in the profession. So I'd love it if you would just add a little bit more, anything that I might have missed, or maybe correct my pronunciation of your earlier community.
Everyone has trouble with that, Matt. I'm originally from upstate New York, and the community is known as Cheektowaga. And where that is, was a first ring suburb of the city of Buffalo. So of course, anytime I mention that I'm from the Buffalo area, I get all sorts of questions about weather and snow. So about 2 years, just shy of 2 years ago, I decided to move on to a little bit warmer climate, and that's what brought me to Asheville.
Well, you've landed in a great spot. What a beautiful community and huge responsibilities. Thanks, Chief, for being part of the conversation today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Happy to introduce our second panelist. Eric Litchfield is a police captain in Santa Rosa, California. Eric has over 27 years of experience, and his responsibilities in the department are wide and varied, including management over numerous divisions such as patrol, incident command, investigations, really a lot of human resource areas as well. He has extensive experience in training and personnel investigations, policy development, training development, all of those really critical operational things that you need to rely on talent in the department. He's a graduate of the Post-Command College Strategic Foresight Program. And one of the interesting things that I've learned is he serves as an advisor to the Institute for American Police Reform on issues like use of force, qualified immunity, police accountability, and labor relations. Eric, thank you for being part of the conversation. You have had a lot of responsibilities in your career and would love to have you just share a little bit more about your background.
Well, I'm a native Californian, so I've been here now for 50 years. See how much longer that goes on with my retirement pending here in a few months from Santa Rosa PD. But I think one of the really interesting things about being in California, especially over starting in 2017 with the Tubbs fire, which I'm sure you're familiar with, made national news, one of the largest wildfires at that time in California's history. Unfortunately, that record's been broken. But what that brought for us and brought for me was a lot of experience in emergency operations, department operations centers, and police departments dealing with natural disasters that were usually more the purview of fire services and those types of things. So for me, that was a huge eye-opener to get involved in those type of incidents. And I think it is something that has become unique to California law enforcement. And it's been an incredible opportunity to expand our knowledge in those areas, and kind of an unfortunate opportunity as well. But it's something that's become very unique in California law enforcement.
You know, you think about all the challenges that law enforcement have had just confronting them nationally on everything. And then you throw on top of that all of the environmental issues that you're contending with. It only adds to the challenge of keeping your community connected and this whole engagement responsibility. So excited to hear what you have to say today, Eric. Thanks a lot for being here.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Let me just kind of introduce the topic now. The topic of the session is putting police needs and expectations into a community context. You know, just given the history of what has happened in law enforcement over the last couple of years and longer period than that, and then you add on things like Eric's talking about with environmental challenges. We have really gone through some challenging times. You know, I've been a city manager for over 30 years, and I always appreciated the role that police chiefs and leaders in law enforcement have played in not only keeping the community safe, but also just helping to create vitality and resiliency in communities, because everything a community does in one way or another has an impact on public safety. So as you start to think about how do you engage with the public and how do you maintain those connections so that people feel like their voices are being heard, especially in areas where you're talking about personal safety, satisfaction around their neighborhoods, feeling comfortable in their environment, and just really sensing that they are part of the community and getting their return on their investment in whatever way they define it in the community becomes such an important conversation to have. And engagement and making those connections are such a critical part. We have done some research around this topic over the last several years. And what I've got in front of you right now is a survey that we did around resident sentiment regarding police services and priorities. And we did this a national survey in 2018 and in 2020 with the tool that we call the National Police Services Survey. And what the chart that you have in front of you right now identifies resident priorities, and the priorities overall have changed or have stayed the same, although they've shifted from 2018 to 2020. The two that I want to just kind of highlight, though, which kind of cues up this conversation, is the desire and the priority for increasing connections with the community and increasing resident accessibility to police. It really points to resident desire to increase and improve those connections with law enforcement and the way that they engage in the public. And so that just naturally then cues up the conversation that we want to have with you. And the three questions that I'm going to ask you to respond to are, what role does the community play in guiding and influencing police services in your community? I've had a lot of police chiefs that say, once you understand where resident needs are, then it's the whole question of how do you manage those expectations. So we want to explore what you're doing in your communities around that. And then finally, what are you finding successful in understanding resident expectations and priorities, tracking your performance as a department, and things that you think would be helpful to other leaders in law enforcement to hear from you about things that are working for you that might also work for them. And so with that, I'd love to just kind of kick off the conversation. And Captain Litchfield, I'd love to start with you on this question. Can you talk about the role that the community plays in guiding and influencing the delivery of police services in your community?
Sure. I think as you saw from what you pointed out earlier from your surveys, there's definitely been an increased interest in the community, and we have felt it both in understanding the police department, how we do things, why we do things, especially in areas of training, all of these transparency issues. But also there's been a much larger desire for the community to engage directly with us. And, you know, the absence of that community engagement piece in any government agency, that's going to lead to a vacuum in decision-making when it comes to policies and the tactics and methods you're using to serve the community. If you think about a community like Santa Rosa, with, you know, the 5th largest city in the North Bay area, it's very economically and racially diverse. We have 176,000 residents. We have 42 square miles. So we're one of also the larger geographic areas. So that gives us 9 patrol beats that the city's divided into. That's a large difference if you go from the east side to the west side of Santa Rosa in culture, diversity, economics, and so on. So you can't have a one-size-fits-all policing strategy for most communities. And Santa Rosa is definitely in that bucket. We have to engage with different parts of the community individually to determine what their needs are and to listen to what the problems and the things that are directly affecting them. If you add to that nationally, tight policing budgets, you know, staffing shortages, which I haven't talked to a police department that's fully staffed in the past 5 years. I know we haven't been fully staffed in at least 7 years. We always have vacancies. We're always struggling with staffing. We're always struggling with budgets. So the delivery of efficient services to the community is a top priority for us. And if we're guessing, if we're trying to make even educated guess as a police department to what the community needs, we cannot efficiently serve them. We need to hear and engage directly with them so we can come up with the strategies that meet their needs. And you also mentioned equitable and fair policing, which is a really big thing now. And I'll talk later in some of the other questions of how we're managing those issues. But again, if you are making guesses at what the community needs, if you don't have the direct engagement piece that they desire to form your strategies and to find out how you're best serving the community, I don't see how you achieve an equitable and fair policing model across a large community or even a medium-sized community. Maybe if you have a very small homogeneous community, that's one thing, but that's not most cities, especially in California right now.
Eric, do you find a lot of diversity within each of the different 9 police beats and the level of resident engagement? I know you're going to talk about that in a future question, but just trying to get, you see a lot of diversity across the community kind of broken down by the beat areas?
Yeah, so generally, you know, the city's divided east and west of a major highway. And it seems like every community you go to, you know, you have an east side and west side because of the large highways that divide up the Bay Area. So yeah, there's going to be significant economic differences, sometimes just between the two sides of the city. And definitely the beats themselves, you know, if you have some beats in one side of the city that are highly affluent and they have much different needs than possibly a Southwest beat that is a much more diverse community. It's possibly economically more working class, and they have different needs in their community. So that's what we find across the board. We can't deploy one strategy across the city of Santa Rosa for policing. We will miss the service needs of large sections of our community if we do that.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for helping to clarify that. That helps a lot. Thank you. Chief Zack, can you talk a little bit about the role that the community plays in the way that you deliver police services in Asheville?
Of course. I mean, I'll agree with pretty much everything Eric said as well. You know, the short answer is, you know, what role should the community play? Well, a significant role. Obviously, this is who we serve. We have to, our service has to be tailored to the values of our respective communities. And of course, we know as we travel across this great nation of ours, the values in some communities differ sharply from the values in other communities. So we have to be responsive and reactive to that. So it's extremely important. But at the same time, as police managers, I think after the events of the past year, there's no shortage of opinions on how we should deliver police service. And oftentimes those opinions can be uninformed, quite frankly. And also, depending on circumstances in individual communities, the expectations could change overnight. For example, here in Asheville, following the protests of last summer, and we had a very difficult time here with 6 days of protest. We deployed chemical agents in our city to get the situation under control. And following the events of last summer, there were many calls in very loud voices to defund police. So you had portions of your community who were very much in favor of that, but other the members of the community who were sharply divided on that issue. So now, how do you listen to all voices, especially when there's voices that don't want to listen to reason or even open a discussion? So I think that's a challenge for communication in some communities. But another thing that happened here in Asheville, we were one of the large, percentage-wise, we lost 90 officers out of 238 in about 7 months' time, who simply walked away from the profession. And a lot of the reasons for that were the talk of defunding the police. And after we suffered those losses, a lot of the voices began, and the expectations began to change, where we went from a very loud, vocal, anti-police defund movement to we need to support our police and we need to refund our police. So as police leaders, the expectations of the community change, and the voices within the communication, depending on what's happening within your local jurisdiction, can change rapidly. So yes, we have to hear our community, but we also have to understand that things can change quickly. And we don't always have the capacity to change quickly. And our responses have to be measured. We have to listen, we have to empathize, we have to understand, but we also have to be prepared for a shift in opinion or a shift in circumstances that may change those voices. So I think that's been a significant challenge that we've had here. And I think that's happening nationwide, as you're seeing in many communities where defund was the mantra, and now especially in some of these larger cities, now they're putting money back into their police departments because those voices got drowned out by other voices. So it's a constant challenge, but of course, the community plays a huge role, but we as police leaders, we have to have a measured response into how we proceed. And it's a challenge. I think it's a challenge for all of us.
I love the fact, though, appreciate you sharing the dynamics that are going on in Asheville, and what a huge responsibility and challenge you've got. But I love the fact that you're really identifying that you really need to understand where the community values are, and that means you kind of have to cut through all the community noise and all of those kind of minority voices that are impacting the way you manage your department to get to what the really values are of the community. Because I think at the end of the day, that's what you're trying to get to, so that you can manage according to that and not based on what the minority voices. Is that a fair way to look at it?
Indeed, it is. And like I say, sometimes some groups are better organized and get their message across in a more articulate manner. And oftentimes there's a certain amount of let's wait and see what happens, and then when the wheels come off, then we hear those voices. So it's just this constant. It's a constant balance. But if you've reacted to every single voice out there, or the loudest voices, you're going to be in a constant state of chaos. And again, I think as executives, we've got to balance the mood, we've got to balance the temperament, we've got to balance the emotion while still listening and hearing and understanding and empathizing. But we have to be very, very careful on, how we make our adjustments.
Yeah, totally appreciate that. That was a great response to that question, particularly given the kind of limited resources with fewer staff people to meet an existing and probably increasing level of responsibility. Let me switch to the second question and stay with you, Chief Zack. Can you talk about the strategies that you're using for managing resident expectations?
I think what we hear over and over again in most communities is they want transparency. They want the facts. They want to know how we're operating. We get constant requests for, what are APD's policies on this? What are their policies on that? Well, the best way to make that information available is just to put it out there. It's not a secret, nor should it be. We have installed a very, very robust transparency dashboard on our website. And you can see the actual crime in your neighborhood. You can see the crime in your district. You can see our use of force numbers. You can see the demographics of our community. You can see the demographics of our police department. And within that site is just a treasure trove of information on everything happening in our community, which includes all of our policies and such. So I think the transparency piece is important, but I think and again, because I get asked so often about what's the department's policy on, X or Y or Z, is that we have to make sure as an agency that we are adhering to the policies that we publish. And one thing that we've done here is we've established an integrity unit. And that integrity unit is constantly, reviewing incidents, reviewing cases to make sure that our officers are following the policies that we put into place. And I think that's a very important step that we've taken, because we could put in a policy on de-escalation. But if we're not following up to make sure our officers are actually performing in accordance with the training that we've provided then, well, then the policies mean nothing and the transparency means nothing. So we've added that extra layer, and we are just reviewing incidents all the time. When we train you in something, we're going to ensure that you're adhering to that training. And I think that helps us to deliver the expectations of the community, because at the end of the day, it's not what the chief says. It's not what is said at a community meeting. What it boils down to each and every day is the interactions that our officers have with the public. They are our best advertisement, and they are our best measure of effectiveness. And they're only going to be effective if we're constantly following up and we're constantly ensuring that they're performing in the manner that our community has expectations for.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Is the integrity unit, sounds like it's fairly new, but is it made up of internal? Does it include any external voices?
Not at this time. It's completely internal. We're trying to separate it. What we don't want it to be a part is like a tattletale squad. What we want is, to ensure and to train and to develop our personnel. And this is a police department. And I'll tell you, when I came here a year and a half ago, 60% of our police department had less than 5 years experience.
Wow.
So now that we've lost 90 officers, I would say 70% of our department has less than 5 years experience. So these officers need to be nurtured. They need to be mentored. And quite frankly, we don't have the available mentors for them. So again, just by constantly providing them positive feedback, explaining to them, this is how we've trained you, this is how we expect you to conduct yourself, but not doing it in more of a coaching environment as opposed to a punitive environment, seems to bring more positive outcomes for us. And of course, that's what we're trying to achieve. And I think 5 years from now, as these officers mature, we're going to have one heck of a police department here.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. That internal process for holding all your officers accountable and to help them be successful on the job. That's probably something that the public doesn't really have a real strong appreciation for, of the internal work that you're doing to strengthen the department, I would suspect. Yeah. Thank you very much, Chief Zack. That was a great response. Really appreciate it. Captain Litchfield, can you share with us the strategies that you're using for managing community expectations in Santa Rosa?
Sure. And I mean, everything that Dave said is tremendous. Really, that internal stuff and the external facing information. We have a similar dashboard. You can, of course, the state of California mandates us to release a lot of things publicly on our website, which we comply with all of that and additional items. And we also have a professional standards team. I had the honor of being the lieutenant in charge of it and the captain who oversaw it. And I think those are very important. We started ours about 5 years ago, and it's been a tremendous asset. And I think Dave's 100% right. You need a specialized team to look internally, especially on things like use of force. We mandate an investigation on every use of force incident that is medium or high level force. So the sergeant has to go out, conduct an investigation of that force and forward it to the team. And I think those are tremendous internal things. One thing I like that the city of Santa Rosa came up with after the George Floyd incidents, we too had 6 days of civil unrest over that, and quite a bit flowed from that, from the community. One thing that the city council did that I really appreciated was they looked at it and said, the police department has things to answer to with the community. Obviously, we too deployed a lot of gas. There was significant amount of damage done to the city. But they also said the police department's not an island. Too often, police departments are looked like as an island or some separate piece of the city that has to answer for things that really are citywide issues and problems, especially in communication and engagement. It's not just the police department's responsibility to engage and understand what the community needs. It's a citywide issue. And many community members came forward and said, yes, we need better engagement and understanding with the police department, but frankly, we're not real happy with any of the city departments as far as engaging and communicating with us. We think you all do a poor job. So why is this only the police department's problem? And the city council did a couple of things that I thought were great. And having participated in them now as cops, we're always suspicious of anything new. How is this gonna, what are they trying to do to us now type of attitude? I mean, it's just kind of part of our profession. But they did the community empowerment plan, and that was the external engagement piece. And the community empowerment plan is run by diversity officers and people within our city departments to engage directly with the community through listening sessions and direct engagement facilitated events throughout the city, where they can hear directly from our community about how do we get together to reorient and be collaborative with our policies and procedures citywide? How do we open avenues of communication and engagement so we're getting the proper input? That doesn't mean that policy gets set, as Dave said, the city has to set policy that works for the entire city, but it needs an engagement and community input section so we can make informed decisions citywide. And so it's just implementing a better and inclusive process for that to engage the community, to get that piece as they make decisions citywide. Then they looked internally and they hired the Seed Collaborative, which is a company that comes in and they look internally across the city, and they want to establish a culture of equity and understanding internally in the city as well, amongst employees, and how to engage with the community, how to engage with each other. So they developed a consulting team. I was part of a 1-hour interview about how internal process of the city works. How is it going within your department? How does it work with other departments? What's working, what doesn't work? Because if we're messed up internally, you can't really do anything externally. And out of the Seed Collaborative, they have the Equitable Policing Plan, which is specific to the police department. And every city department kind of has a thing specific to them. The Equitable Policing Plan is 17 police department employees, so representatives from all ranks and all the labor unions, plus 8 community members that get together and talk about three different things. One is bridging, and that's community policing, relations, outreach, and engagement. So how can we bridge better between the community and the police department? Prevention, what are our strategies to actually prevent crime? And what are our strategies to prevent internal policy violations and things that damage those relationships with the community? So kind of an internal and external prevention plan. And then protection. How do we provide for the safety, health, and protection of our citizens, of our officers, and people who are involved in the criminal justice system, meaning suspects, including things like restorative justice? So I thought that was a really good holistic approach to managing expectations citywide and not just laying it on the police department, as happens too often, as this is your problem, take care of it. It's a much holistic approach.
Yeah, thank you. That's excellent. I really appreciate how you described out that 3-layered approach and the internal, external work on bridging, prevention, and protection. I think that really lays out well. And as a city manager, I also appreciate you talking about the island issue, because I have experienced that throughout my entire career. I always used to tell city employees, every city employee is a public safety employee, because if your streets aren't maintained, the police department's going to be dealing with more accidents. If the building inspection, they're all interrelated. Everything the city does is interrelated. So dealing with engagement on a really comprehensive way makes just absolute sense. So I really appreciate you acknowledging that work that you're doing in Santa Rosa. That's really special. Let me switch over to the third question, and Captain Litchfield, let me stay with you on this one. Can you talk about the tools and the methods that you're using just for simply learning what residents need and what their priorities are, and how you're tracking your performance as a department?
Sure. Technology is a great thing, and I have heard, I've listened to a lot of people talk about, Nextdoor or Nixle and EventBridge, all the things, the great technology tools we use, especially in a larger community, to try to get out to people. And we, like everyone else, we use those tools extensively to communicate. But they're great for kind of a one-way communication, but a lot of those don't really facilitate a two-way communication or discussion, especially if you don't have staff to monitor all your social media all the time. We have 5 social media platforms. We do have a full-time PIO who's a sergeant, but he does not have time to monitor and engage with everyone. And we really found that you need that personal engagement. So we do a couple of things. One, and this was pre-COVID, and we're hoping to bring it back next year, our community listening sessions. So what we will do is we have a marketing and communications team that for the city of Santa Rosa, and we have someone assigned specifically to the police department, which is great because we are not marketing professionals. And I could tell you cops do not market anything well, including themselves. So it's a great tool to have. So what she would do was do a 2-hour facilitated controlled table discussion in each beat of the city, where we would go out, community members would come in, they would get to sit down at a table with the police department personnel. Generally, we would have the beat sergeant and lieutenant there who are responsible for that beat, members of command and executive staff, or any specialized unit that operates extensively, like downtown. We have a downtown enforcement team. They would have been involved in that. They would be there. You sit with 5 or 6 community members. It's a 2-hour, very well facilitated and guided discussion on what are the issues here in this area, what are your priorities, what are your needs, and then there would be a report out. It's a really great process. It was very eye-opening, and I was suspicious. Can we really do this in an hour and a half, 2 hours? Yeah, you absolutely can, and it's with the right facilitator. And we got a tremendous amount of information out of that to help us guide beat by beat strategies. The other thing we have the Chief's Community Ambassador Team. So that's 12 to 15 community members throughout the city who focus on law enforcement and community issues. And they're selected to be from a diverse economic, geographic, race, and cultural throughout the city. So we have a good representation to advise the chief on different issues. And they will do things like hear about certain policies, procedures. They can ask questions. They can bring things forward to us. And they are not selected based on their friendliness to the police department. That's a key part of the ambassador team. They are not hostile, but we be sure that their views, they have a diverse views of the police department. And I have dealt with them. I've done presentations with them, and they ask really good critical questions, and a lot of good information or things we didn't think of comes out of those interactions with them. And it helps us to communicate out to the wider community, having their input, and frankly, having them grill us sometimes gives you an idea of what's coming from the community and how to address that. So they keep you on your feet, I will say that. We also do the community police experience. It used to be the Community Police Academy. However, anyone who's been through a police academy knows that's more of a teach at you. It doesn't really encourage a back and forth. That's not why you're at the police academy. So we kind of switched up the format. We call it the police experience. We bring citizens throughout the community into that. They can apply to that. Our CCAT, the ambassador team, went through it. And we teach them about the police department, but it gives them an opportunity to hear things like how do personnel investigations work, how do use of force investigation work, and they can have a back and forth, ask questions, get questions answered, challenge things, and so on. But it really serves two purposes. It's a great educational piece, but a great information and sounding board piece for some of our stuff. And lastly, one thing that I really like, and I was suspicious of this too, when it was proposed by the prior city manager, is the Public Safety Subcommittee, which was 3 city council members who form a subcommittee to come in and talk about policies and procedures and so on in the police department. And the reason I was initially concerned was the chief of police sets policy for the police department. Of course, based on law, best practice, and certain levels of input, but the chief sets policy, the chief decides discipline. It's the chief who needs to run the police department. So we didn't want a situation where 3 members of city council were setting policy or trying to run the police department. That has not been at all. It has been a tremendous tool. They're open. These are open to the public. So we do bring critical policies forward. After George Floyd, we brought forward our crowd control policies, our First Amendment policies. When we instituted the LRAD, that was quite a discussion. But the community got to hear why we were doing these things. The subcommittee asked some great questions. In fact, a couple of the policies that I presented that I had worked on, they brought things up I didn't think of that made good changes to those policies. But they didn't create policy, they didn't set policy, but they did improve. And it gives the community a chance to hear things. I'll be presenting, we eliminated or heavily modified 11 calls for service that we respond to recently, just through personnel shortages and, quite frankly, decriminalization and other things that go on. For us, we had to make changes, and I'll be presenting all 11 of those to them in an upcoming meeting. And I'm actually looking forward to seeing what their input is on that. But those have already been implemented, so they are not there to change or implement those things, but they are there to kind of monitor and allow the public to hear what's going on.
Eric, thanks for providing that great list of ways that you are engaging with the public. I think that's really very helpful. One question on the subcommittee that I just want to make sure we get taped here. How often does that group meet?
Every other month for police. So they rotate between police and fire. We used to meet together, but they decided to split it up. So 1 month is police, 1 month is fire, and we just keep rotating.
Well, that's very helpful. And I appreciate hearing about the CCAT. I think that's a great opportunity to get representative voices from the community to advise. And so it sounds like you're doing a lot of great ways of engaging in the community. Congratulations on all of that work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Chief Zack, can you share with us the tools and methods that you're using for getting resident input on things that are important and priorities that they have?
Sure thing. And, I could echo a lot of what Eric said. Obviously, they're doing great work there. And we have similar boards and programs and so forth. But, I think we've all been in this business on the law enforcement side, but also on the managing of government side. And kind of like what I said a little bit earlier, managing community expectations and individual resident expectations can be tricky. And especially as we all know, you'll get the same cast of characters who call into council meetings or show up at council meetings. And the silent majority often doesn't. And oftentimes, it's just human nature that when you have these, this same group coming in over and over again, voicing their concerns, you tend to think that that's the opinion of the entire community, when in fact, it's really maybe just that person's opinion. But we've seen through experience what an influence that can have when we don't hear from all of our residents. So one of the things we did here is we really consolidated our effort and our communication effort. We used to have every one of our patrol districts, there were 4, had a community resource officer assigned. And what we found is, those community resource officers would rotate in and out of assignments, maybe move to other shifts, so on and so forth. So there was never a consistent message coming from the police department, but also there was never consistent feedback coming into the police department. So what we decided to do here is we said we needed to really establish more continuity. So we created a community engagement division devoted solely to quality of life issues in a neighborhood, in all of our neighborhoods. And we put that team together. Our initial hope was to have 15 officers assigned to that division. Right now, we're at about 10. But they don't answer calls for service. They're not pulled away for other assignments or to backfill anywhere else. Their sole job, their sole function is to solve neighborhood quality of life issues. And what we found by having this group of personnel dedicated to that task, they are forming much stronger relationships at the neighborhood level. And they're seeing the problems, and they're seeing the recurring problems, and maybe the recurring characters that are causing those problems, whether it be a barking dog, whether it would be a construction site, whether it would be issues with homeless. They're establishing those relationships. They're getting to know the neighborhoods better. They're more responsive. The people who call in to complain aren't getting a different officer every time with a different message, but also the messages that come out of the police department. We have 16 separate community engagement groups, and there was a different supervisor assigned to each one. And of course, each group got a different message based upon who the supervisor for that meeting was. We took it down to one supervisor who oversees all those communications, who filters all the information, who makes sure that the message coming from the police department is understood and that it's consistent from neighborhood to neighborhood, especially when after the massive loss of personnel that we had to communicate reductions in service. All across our community, they were getting a consistent message. They were all allowed to ask questions, have those questions answered fully. So we knew that the information flow, again, was consistent. So that was really, really important. The next thing we're doing is we're doing a much better job, and we're contracting outside the department with a firm that is going to manage and follow web channels and web traffic to see exactly what's being discussed in our community. So for example, if an article appears in our local newspaper, we'll know how many times that article was shared, what neighborhoods it was shared in, whether it's picking up traffic, whether this is something that people are very concerned about or not concerned about at all. So there's not like an overrepresentation maybe to a news story, but also we can be on these individual channels and say, hey, this is what they're talking about. Residents are actually talking about this traffic problem. Residents are actually talking about the homeless issues in a certain sector of the city that maybe we're not hearing about at a council meeting, or maybe something that wasn't emailed to us or didn't funnel through our community engagement division. So we're following that web traffic, finding out what's important to people. What are people talking about in our community before these meetings are even held, which allows us to be that much more proactive. So we're getting more data by following that social media web traffic. So I think that's going to be a big tool for us moving down the road, and it's going to be an important. We're also going to have the ability to conduct community surveys through this web tool that will accurately represent the demographics of the neighborhoods that we serve. So we're not getting just like a one-sided community survey where that data will be filtered and be far more representative of our community, as opposed to just putting an online survey out there. So I think we're going to really be taking advantage of the technology that's available in the very near future.
Chief Hoyt, thanks for that. Congratulations on your community engagement division. I think that's a really smart move. Are you allocating your officers? Well, first of all, does the community engagement division include sworn and unsworn, or is it mostly limited to sworn officers? And are you assigning them to specific areas of the community?
Actually, they're completely responsive to where we're hearing the concern. So no, we're giving them the entire city.
Okay.
And as our communities become more aware of this division's existence, they're communicating directly with those officers. When a community feels very empowered when they have the email of 15 individual police officers and not just one. And so as this is taken off, They're not calling the mayor's office as much. They're not emailing the chief as much. They're going directly to these officers because they know they're going to get a response perhaps within 24 hours, if not sooner, if not that day, that at least that first contact will be made. But what we're also seeing from that is, some of the gadfly population, are not being overrepresented as they may have been in the past, because the officers are very familiar with, we're never going to make this person happy.
Yeah.
So we're really being able to triage neighborhood concerns much more effectively.
Yeah, totally appreciate
that
that.
answers.
Yep. Yeah, you're doing a lot of great stuff, and I just love the fact of all of the really positive changes that you're putting into place around the accountability, around the engagement, all of those kinds of things that, as a city manager, I absolutely respect that kind of work in a community and the value that it presents, and just helping folks feel closer and more connected. So thanks for the work that you're doing, and congratulations on all of the advancements that you're making.